While many Americans are watching the Oscars tonight, I personally think it's a waste of time, especially in those acceptance speeches where it's nonstop political bullshit and, anti-capitalism. They criticize the president routinely, and we're getting preached at from celebrities. I just love the Ricky Gervais opening monologue from the Golden Globes. That was awesome. Unfortunately, they're probably never going to let him do that again, but that was great. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it on YouTube. It's a really good 7 or 8 minute long just rant where he just lets the Hollywood hypocrites have it. But basically tonight at the Oscars, there's celebrities wearing custom-made suits, custom-made dresses and gowns, very expensive jewelry, 6 or 7 figure jewelry, preaching to us that capitalism is bad. And if you know anything about the accounting of Hollywood movies, oh my God, go and Google accounting for Hollywood movies. I mean, that is what movie studios are allowed to get away with. Is crazy. It is not normal accounting. So the investors are normally suckers, or it's governments that are subsidizing things for a propaganda purpose. Sometimes it's the US military, sometimes it's the Chinese government. But these Hollywood celebrities are drastically overpaid. I care about helping everyday Americans. And the story that came out, and normally the mainstream media is really, really bad about having stories like this, but this is actually an interesting story. Maybe they forgot to sweep this one under the rug, as you can see there on your screen. So, this survey came out a couple days ago. Nearly half of Americans say rising cost of living is the greatest threat to their financial security. And this is from the CNBC website, so shockingly it got on there, but I doubt they're going to talk about any of the things I'm talking about, like shrinkflation, stagflation, or my main thesis about what has largely happened to most governments since the 2008 financial crisis, and the US government is no exception to this. Copying what Japan has done, Japanification, financial repression, manipulating interest rates lower, so large corporations, big government, the banks can stay afloat, at least temporarily, till they go to negative interest rates and then wreck everything, as we've seen in the European Union and elsewhere, is stagflate and tax and lie. And this is what Americans are starting to realize, although unfortunately a lot of them are still blaming capitalism, but they do realize that their standard of living with cost increases on many different items, whether that's education, whether that's healthcare, whether that's rent, whether that's food, insurance premiums, all the different types of insurance premiums, all these things are going up. Even car prices are up a lot in the last couple decades, although with hedonics and all these bullshit government adjustments from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're telling us that if there was new technology put in the car, then that's actually deflationary, even though the price of the car might have more than doubled in the last 20 years. So stagflate and tax and lie, the real economy, not the bullshit government economic data, whether that's from China or from the US or from Japan or from the European Union. The real economy, everyday people dealing with higher cost of living. They're dealing with shrinkflation. They're dealing with lower portions. They're getting less goods and services for more fiat currency units. Okay, so let me just talk about this article by Megan Leonhardt from February 5th. Nearly half of Americans say rising cost of living is the greatest threat to financial security. A strong stock market and low unemployment rate have not dispelled Americans' fears that the rising costs of everyday expenses threaten their long-term financial health. Almost half, or 47% of Americans, believe that cost of living is the biggest threat to their financial security and long-term investments, according to TD Ameritrade's Financial Disruption Survey, which polled over 1,000 U.S. adults with at least $10,000 in investable assets. And in my opinion, neither political party can fix this. Oh, politicians will promise things. You have on the Democrat side, you have tons of promises that cannot possibly be afforded. You have Andrew Yang with the quote-unquote freedom dividend, which is one of the worst Orwellian misnomers I've ever heard in my life. other than the Patriot Act, one of the worst Orwellian misnomers recently, other than the Patriot Act. You have all these other politicians, even Tulsi Gabbard, who is good on foreign policy, anti-war. Her economics are total garbage, promising much higher minimum wages, which will drastically hurt small business owners. Ask a small business owner if they can afford a much higher minimum wage increase. And then they'll tell you that, oh yeah, well, we're going to be switching then to automation and touchscreens and other types of investments and business strategies, or they're going to go out of business. Anyway, Republicans also do a lot of mistakes with that as well. A lot of Republicans just talk the small government talk, and then they blow money like crazy. Republicans tend to be borrow and spend, and Democrats are tax and borrow and spend. That's my opinion. Okay, back to this article. Almost just as many, 44% of adults surveyed, fear the rising cost of healthcare. And then the Harris Polling Company did this on behalf of TD Ameritrade. That's not surprising. Tom Butch, Managing Director of Retail Distribution at TD Ameritrade, told CNBC's Make It, healthcare in particular has had high prominence and visibility as a national issue for so long, which has spurred many concerns about its availability and relative cost. In total, Americans spend an average of about $5,000 a year on out-of-pocket healthcare costs, including insurance, prescriptions, medical supplies, according to the latest consumer spending data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's double the amount Americans spent in 1984, according to analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditures Survey by data company Clever. What I will also add in here is that wages have not risen. So wages, according to the government's own data, wages have not risen for Americans really. Although recently Trump has said that wages have risen, but for the most part, wages have not risen for many Americans in real terms when accounting for the official government inflation rate since the 1970s. So you have a situation where a lot of everyday items that Americans need that they cannot substitute, you have to eat a certain amount of food, you have to have shelter over your head, you have to have at least some type of health care, probably have to have a car, or maybe you can just rent a car, or Uber or Lyft or something. But even then, those costs may eventually go up. So wages are not rising proportionate to cost of living, and that is what causes people's standard of living to fall. When cost of living rises for the basic everyday necessities, people are getting killed with shrinkflation. I used to eat, before I went more paleo, little anecdote here. I used to eat at this really well-respected sandwich shop. It's a small little chain. It's not a big chain. Small little chain here in the area. And they're known for their ginormous sandwiches that are at a good price with a lot of meat and vegetables in there. And I haven't eaten at the sandwich shop. I haven't eaten there for over a year, might be 2 years. I used to eat there at least once a week for many, many years since I moved here, for at least over a decade. At least once a week for over a decade, I used to eat there. Except when I was in college. But then I'd come back and I'd eat there because I really liked this place. And they had very big portions. The prices were good. It was a very popular place. And then I just went in there 2 weeks ago with my dad and my brother on the weekend for lunch. And the menu prices were up a couple dollars. Okay, that's normal, right? But guess what? Shrinkflation, the amount of meat in the sandwiches was less than 50%. So they had never, and I've been going to this restaurant for many, many years, I would say over 15 years, ordering sandwiches from them. And I have never noticed the portion size of the meat in the sandwich fall. And then it's been, a year or two since I've been there. And then all of a sudden, the amount of meat in the sandwich is down more than 50%, and the menu price is up $2. So that is a real hit on people's cost of living, because there was more bread in the sandwich than actually meat and vegetables. Just ridiculous stuff. And there's, I've talked in the past about Taco Tuesday examples, how one restaurant used to have a Taco Tuesday special and their costs were rising so rapidly that they had to end it. So I'm sure in the replay of this video after this live stream show's over, you can put examples of this. Go ahead and put your examples of shrinkflation below the video after this is over. In the live stream chat, it's not going to show up as well. Put it down in the video so we get more views. The YouTube channel is almost over 31,000 YouTube channel subscribers. And again, if you've been a long-time listener to my channel, definitely go back and check to see if YouTube unsubscribed you from my channel, because from what I've heard, this is very common now. Unfortunately, YouTube's doing this to me. So not only are they making it harder for me to grow my channel and add new subscribers, because a lot of my videos are no longer showing up in search, they're also unsubscribing longtime listeners to my channel without telling them. So I'm sure everyone has their examples of shrinkflation. There's examples of this with consumer staple items too. I took pictures last year of the Charmin Ultra Strong toilet paper, and the amount of it was down a lot. It was down, I think, like very significantly, almost 20% in only a few months. Shrinkflation, stagflation. Shrinkflation is part of stagflate and tax and lie. So these companies have to maintain their profit margins. If they don't maintain their profit margins, especially these large cap companies that are publicly traded because they've over leveraged their balance sheet with debt, if they don't maintain their profit margins, they're going to go bankrupt quickly too. And that means people are going to lose their jobs. But these governments are increasing property taxes, a lot of these local governments. And George Gammon and myself have been talking about this. George Gammon cited my work a couple weeks ago. Shout out to George if he's listening. And mentioned my work a couple weeks ago in a video talking about higher property taxes, that as governments, especially the US government, inflates higher real estate prices, that they collect just massive amounts of capital gains taxes and property taxes. So that's part of the scheme too. But this goes back to fiat currency. When fiat currency is being devalued rapidly and there's more and more currency units, it's chasing the same or fewer goods and services. Because the amount of new goods and services is not being created nearly as rapidly as the fiat currency and credit units that are being created. Pudenda, no sex jokes here about shrinkflation. Got to keep this PG-13. I'm already in enough trouble with YouTube. I don't need my ad revenues totally removed on every single video. Yeah. That's the government numbers that inflation's under 2%. You're seeing all these Keynesians and all these Wall Street people that know all the government statistics go on CNBS and Bloomberg and Bubble Vision or whatever the funny nickname you have and talk about, why can't they get any inflation? And the Federal Reserve Board of Governors are saying we need to increase the inflation target. We need an inflation target above 2%. But meanwhile, the people on Main Street are just getting killed, getting the hammer over the head with stagflation and taxes and lying about it. It's been that way for years now. The best ways, if you're interested, the best ways to monitor consumer prices are not the CPI. They're not the MIT Billion Price Index. It's the Chapwood Inflation Index by Ed Butowski, who I interviewed years ago about this. Chris Martinson also interviewed Ed Butowski about this. The Chapwood Inflation Index tracks 500 different consumer items twice a year in a survey in all the major U.S. cities. And his work is based on, it's more in-depth, detailed work based on John Williams of ShadowStats inflation numbers that the Federal Reserve used to use. The Chapwood Inflation Index builds on John Williams of ShadowStats numbers. I like the Chapwood Inflation Index better, and it's been saying that there's inflation in many major U.S. cities between 8 and about 13.2%, 8% and 13.2% every year average inflation for the last 5 years. The Big Mac Inflation Index, yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't looked at it recently. The chicken sandwich size at Chick-fil-A is down a lot, though. The last time I was at Chick-fil-A was maybe like 8 to 12 months ago. And when I ordered the chicken sandwiches at Chick-fil-A, they were much smaller than when I had them in college. They're down a lot. What island do I recommend as a great escape? Oh, islands have to import a lot of items, so those are going to be more expensive there, unless you grow your own fruits or vegetables. I hope you're rich if you move into an island. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Vincion Magtao. Haster says, it does make me wonder where these people shop who generate these numbers. So Peter Schiff got in an argument years ago with an intern. He was here in DC giving a speech, I think, at George Washington University. And one of the business school or economics students there called Peter Schiff out, and he was bragging, this business school student or economics student at George Washington University, how he was an intern at the Federal Reserve, and he admitted how the Federal Reserve tracks prices, and all he did was go to grocery stores and to like Target and Walmart and just write down the prices on the different prices on a sheet, like on pen and paper, write down the different prices for the consumer items, but he was not tracking the cost per unit. So what these companies do, and it's actually very clever, is they might keep the price the same, or they might only increase the price just a little bit, maybe less than 10%, maybe. I've seen some consumer goods, some consumer staple items, where the price is up like 10 cents or 20 cents in the last like 6 months, and then up another 10 cents or 20 cents in the last year. So it's increased a couple times. But what they really do is they reduce the portion size, the amount of the good that you get for the price, and that drops the cost per unit down by like 30% or 33%. I've seen cost per units and some of them drop 40-50% in only a couple years, some consumer items that I've tracked. So the Federal Reserve has interns go to the grocery store, go to the pharmacy, go to Target, Walmart, stores like that, big box stores, and write down the prices of items. And they would say, oh, the price only went up 10 cents, so it's 1% inflation or 0% inflation on that price. Yeah, the cost per unit can go up a lot. The cost per unit goes up, but then you're getting 30%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% less of the item. So cost per unit would go up. The amount of the good you would get for the same price drops. Okay, back to the article. Went off there on a tangent, but I thought it was appropriate given... Okay, meanwhile, cost of living, including food, housing, education, medical costs. Okay, this is bullshit. I'll just read it anyway. Increased by 2.3% over the past year alone, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. Again, I don't believe it. The cost, it's in the government's incentive due to the cost of living adjustments to underreport the real inflation rate. So cost of living adjustments are what government employee pension plans, what Social Security checks, those things are tied to. Cost of living adjustments. So it is in the government's incentive to drastically underreport inflation. Otherwise, they have to give people higher cost of living adjustments, which means larger Social Security checks, larger government employee retirement benefit checks, etc. Cost of medical care rose 4.6% in 2019, the largest year-over-year increase since 2007, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports, and they're not even tracking the right things for healthcare costs, for medical care. Housing also jumped. I can't remember exactly what they tracked, but it's not accurate. I remember Danielle DiMartino Booth and other experts talking about this. Housing also jumped 3.2% last year, while education expenses rose 2.1%. Food prices increased about 1.8%. None of those things I think are right. In contrast, real wages effectively remained stalled last year, showing only a 0.2% year-over-year increase according to the pay scale index. But looking longer term, pay scale found median wages when adjusted for inflation declined 9% since 2006. Wow. There's a certain fragility right now. While the expert Butch, who was interviewed for the article, says, while the two biggest sources of significant financial disruption in the past Employment and investment performance have receded. Americans are still feeling on edge because the markets and workforce will likely shift. In order to shield your future from financial threats, the expert Butch recommends developing a comprehensive financial plan and building an emergency savings fund of 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Some of those are not bad ideas. A comprehensive financial plan. Normally, a comprehensive financial plan at your investment broker, I know because I worked at it, is just stocks and bonds, cash, maybe money market. That's a comprehensive financial plan. Is 60% stocks, 40% bonds. 40% stocks, 60% bonds. That's comprehensive. And then they charge you big fees for that too. Okay, message on the importance of good financial habits is one many Americans seem to have taken to heart. Americans say they're better prepared for financial disruptions today than when TD surveyed U.S. adults 5 years ago. Okay, so this is only, that survey part is for people who have money invested, over $10,000 in the survey at TD Ameritrade. So if you have that type of savings and money invested, you're probably planning making investments and you're thinking more long term. But there's a very high percentage of Americans that, according to surveys, other surveys like Bankrate and others, where 41% of American adults have $1,000 or less in their checking or savings accounts for any type of emergency. So it's a distorted picture. Some Americans are doing well and a lot of them are not. Meanwhile, in the mainstream media, there's other bullshit surveys from dailymail.com, which just put out this article that Americans are more satisfied with life than ever before, a poll shows. There was another survey in 2019 claiming that in my age demographic, like Americans ages like 23 or 24 to age like 37 or 38, 25% of those millennials and Generation Z's adults had $100,000 or more in savings. I don't believe it. Now, if you were going to ask them $50,000 or more in student loan debt, I would believe it, but not having student loan, not having that type of savings, not the ones I've talked to. And I live in an area where people my age have fairly high paying jobs. They're still not doing well financially because they have student loan debt, because they have high rent, because they have enormous insurance payments and car payments. And, you know, if they're a single guy, they're spending a lot of money on dating, an insane amount of money on dating. So when you add all that stuff up, even if they have a very high paying job, they do not have $100,000 in savings. They might have like 10 grand or 20 grand or 30 grand, but not 100 grand. I've met people with high paying jobs around here in my age demographic who have good jobs, but they had so many other bills from student loan debt and all this other, and rent and car payments, and then they're dating, you know, pretty girls with very expensive taste, very high expectations. They don't have anything close to $100,000 in savings. Maybe it's in their 401k. Maybe, but I also know people that had to drain their retirement accounts to get by. So I know people that got in trouble they got behind on bills and they had to drain their retirement savings. They had to pay a penalty. So I know people who had high paying jobs and they had to pay a big tax penalty. So maybe, but not likely. Jesse, who's my friend who lives around this area too, moved here a number of years ago, says a nice dinner for two in DC is $250. Yep. And if you're dating a very spoiled, high-maintenance girl, then she's going to want the tasting menus at a Michelin star restaurant, which you're looking at like $400, $300, or $400 a person. $400 a person, then they're going to want to drink wine. Yeah, no thanks. I know this because I see it on their dating profiles, that's what they want for a first date. And it's not just the higher end, the prettiest girls either. Housed Portalens, who is, I think, a Patreon account contributor, one of my around 250 Patreon account contributors, so thank you very much, says he hates the hypocrisy of the 1%. I do too. The worse the hypocrite, the more I want to make fun of them. The more I want to call them out, the more I want to make fun of them. Max says he just got back from grocery shopping and talk about shrinkflation. Yep. I go into the grocery store now and I buy like 10 small things and it's like $40. When it used to be maybe 22, 25, like 10 years ago. I remember in college, and I didn't graduate college that long ago. It was a little over 10 years ago. I remember going to Walmart or Target, you know, one of those college runs. And I remember I'd fill up my shopping cart and it would be like $70. And that same filling up your cart of stuff now is like 150. It's like 130, between 130 and 150. Jen asks, where do I live? I live right near Tyson's Corner Mall. I don't want to go into crazy details, but that's close to where I live. I also go to drive around. I go into DC occasionally, Clarendon area. I used to go hang out and party a lot, but those days are behind me now. Dirty Bubble Rising says, George Gammon recently did an excellent video about the benefits of sound money. It creates price deflation, rising wages, and encourages high savings rate. No wonder the elites hate it. It also increases your purchasing power the more you save. You get more for less. And now we're getting less for more. So it takes more and more dollars to maintain the same standard of living now. And if you're not growing your income, your standard of living is going to start declining very, very rapidly. I'm seeing this with my parents. My parents are not focused. They're of retirement age, and they are not focused on adding rental properties, getting investments that produce income. They're not focused on any of that. They're not focused on maybe starting a side business online. They don't want to do any of that. Randy, there has not been free market forces and real capitalism in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry for many, many decades. It started, I did a show on this over the summer, it started with FDR. Because when FDR put in wage and price controls during the Great Depression, one of the only ways employers could give their employees more benefits was by paying for health insurance. And then, of course, the government, the U.S. federal government, started getting very heavily involved. And they've been heavily involved since. And then it went up in order of magnitude after Medicare and Medicaid. Lyndon Baines Johnson, if you go back and look at his speeches, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, and look at his speeches, he made a ridiculous promise that it would never cost Medicare and Medicaid more than $30 billion a year, some ridiculous sum, and it's way more than that now. It's orders of magnitude larger than that in cost now. And then Obamacare made things even worse for many Americans. $7.82 says, small burger, fries, drink at Five Guys, $15, including local taxes. And when I was living in Southern California more than 20 years ago, when I was a teenager, I used to be able to get a double-double back then when it was a lot larger, fries and a soda for under $10, I think. And it was a massive burger. So it was a two large double patties, not the tiny little silver dollar ones they have now that I've seen in pictures. So In-N-Outs had massive shrinkflation too. You also have the African swine flu, which is putting a lot of pressure on higher pork prices all over the globe. And maybe I'll do this on another show because that video will 100% get demonetized from what I've heard from my source in Wuhan. But the Chinese government has changed the policy on food again in Wuhan. And now the government is doing the food deliveries and they are rationing the pork. And the prices on the pork are as bad as the prices in pork in China were increasing already with the African swine flu. And they were increasing a lot, even according to the government's own data from the National Bureau of Statistics in China. But in Wuhan, the pork prices are going nuts because there's rationing. Two meals at Taco Bell were $16. Oh man, that's crazy. I'm looking through listener questions and comments. I don't know if a gold standard could fix everything. Governments are not going to voluntarily go on a gold standard. I would love a gold standard or a bimetallic standard with gold and silver. I don't think any government is voluntarily going to want to go on a gold standard. I maybe the market will force it. Maybe. I'm not holding my breath. You can go on your own gold standard, though. You can be your own central banker and go on your own gold standard. You can't really get anything for $1 anymore in terms of food. I think even the grocery store, like a pack of gum's over $1 now. Shrinkflation is just getting out of control. The pork prices are up a lot. I've noticed this now with the African swine flu, especially in the last year. The portion of pork you're getting is a lot less, or they move the price on a menu up. RR says he is his own central bank. I am my own central bank too. And I don't trust governments or the large government central banks. I don't trust any government at this point. They're all liars. I wonder what the gold community, I wonder what their excuses are going to be for the Chinese government this time. Gold community is going to have to wait a little bit longer for China to play out their long game strategy and crash in the dollar, because the dollar index is at, I put this up on my screen here right before I started the live stream show about 30 minutes ago. Dollar index is at 98.65. It's almost back to 99. What that means to me is a lot of fly capital is leaving China. We're hearing stories that China is going to be shut down a month. My sister is friends. She went to high school and grade school with this girl who graduated as a teacher, and she's teaching in China, and apparently she was just told, she's not in one of the tier 1 or tier 2 cities, but she was just told that school's not going back till first week or two of March. So China's just going to take them all again. They're just going to take a month off. Don't worry, the central banks will keep everything, the major stock market indexes afloat. It is the oil market, the natural gas market, the iron ore market, the copper market, and other base metal markets where there probably looks like there will be price discovery. Until then. And the global supply chain was moving out of China before this. I think it's going to accelerate the global supply chain leaving China. Jonathan asks a good question. Between China, the US, and the European Union, which one has the worst debt problem? They all have really bad debt problems. However, if you just want to look in the last 10 years, no one has created more credit bubble than China in the last 10 years. So the US had a debt problem prior to 10 years ago. And yes, it's bad, but in the last 10 years, China caught up to the others. And the average income for many Chinese is only around between 11,000 and 13,000. That's the purchasing power parity stuff that they then adjust. So you have massive debt problems in the Chinese economy, and the average Chinese income is only about $11,000. If you accumulate physical gold and silver for insurance, savings, and wealth preservation, you are your own central bank. Okay, well, I think that's it for this show. I want to thank everyone for listening. You can go back to watching the Oscars now if you want to if you want to laugh at their hypocrisy. But definitely go listen to that rant from Ricky Gervais. That was awesome. The 7 or 8 minutes long one from the Golden Globes where he just roasted the Hollywood elites, making fun of them about Jeffrey Epstein, their hypocrisy and capitalism, and a lot of other things. Just great. I'll probably put that at the end of the show, in the last 30 seconds on the replay, if you haven't seen it yet. It's just great. He's never going to be allowed to do another another hosting for another show. Actually, I don't know if anyone's going to be allowed to host because of how bad he did everyone there. I don't know if they're going to let any comedian ever host one of these award shows ever again. Not risk it anymore. Okay, everyone, have a great week. It'll be a very interesting week. We'll see. I would monitor the oil price. The dollar is looking, on the dollar index, the dollar is looking like it wants to go to 99. So I would monitor that. The dollar goes to 99. All that dollar denominated debt, all those dollar derivatives, the dollar liabilities, the forward dollar swaps, those things, the fuse on those is shrinking. And again, thank you very much to my 250 Patreon account contributors, my dozen or so monthly PayPal contributors, and people throw me a tip once in a while. I'll also take the top 6 cryptocurrencies, and no, Ripple is not a top 6 cryptocurrency. Okay, everyone, thank you.